Chapter 3. That's just life, too. Sizzle. Drops of oil splattered here and there from the hot grill. The pork belly being cooked wriggled as it neared perfection. Well, it might be more accurate to say that it was being burned. After all, one side of the pork belly was beginning to let out smoke and turning to charcoal. The old hero sitting in front of me seemed to not mind it at all. It was almost like he had no intention of flipping the meat over. He just silently stared at it. What a waste. I slowly tried to get up and reached for the tongs with my short arms, intending to flip the meat over. The hero before me spoke. How long has it been, exactly? I feel like it's been a little over 10 years. The man could have been called a friend or a comrade, considering my small circle of contacts. He'd clearly been thinking about what to say first. It was before I was conscripted by the army, so 17 years ago. In truth, I had been the one to enlist, but I didn't see a reason to explain it to him at that moment. 17 years, huh? Has it already been that long? It was questionable whether two people who hadn't met for over a decade could still call each other friends, but we had been exceptionally close at one point, so neither of us thought much of it. He'd been a comrade in blood in a time when evil ran rampant and we were constantly covered in gore and flesh. Even if we forgot each other or lost contact, our connection would endure forever. I never heard from you after that, so I thought you were dead. You've been alive and well, huh? I asked. Sorry for leaving without saying anything, he replied. It wasn't like I could have received any messages while I was in the army. Still, looking back, I was a bit upset. Couldn't he have at least given me a heads up? I swallowed my true feelings and quietly said, I'm sure you had your own circumstances. Was it because I lied? I grabbed my shot glass and poured the soju into my mouth to wet my dry tongue. He chucked in response, likely thinking that the sight of a small child taking a shot was hilarious. Pfft. Does no one say anything about you drinking in that form? The show's already over. Why don't you drop the transformation and get back to normal? What are they going to do? It lists my age on the hero certificate anyway. Transformation, huh? I thought to myself, I guess I have to tell him. Truthfully, I can't return to normal, I bluntly stated. Huh. I suddenly transformed a few weeks before I was discharged. And, for some reason, I found myself unable to change back. Ever since then, I've been stuck like this. At a loss for words, he stared at me with his mouth agape. Seeing his reaction, I continued, That bastard, Unho, told me that I spent too much time as a magical girl and that my very essence had changed because of it. It was a funny story. Feeling my mouth become dry once more, I took another shot of soju. Unho? Your mascot? He asked. Yeah. I found myself gritting my teeth in anger after thinking of my mascot again. I was sure he was lazing around in the living room, getting fatter by the second. I think that's enough about me. How about you? During the show, you mentioned volunteering. I didn't want to talk about my fat mascot anymore and tried to shift the topic. Volunteering, huh? He smirked and gave a dry laugh before leaning in. Luckily, he didn't seem particularly interested in my mascot either. Maybe it was just the dim lighting of the restaurant, but his face looked much older than it had a moment prior. His face retained some of the youthfulness from his hero days thanks to his well-trained physique, but time had etched faint wrinkles into his skin, which were further accentuated by the deep shadows falling over his face. Haram, he said. What? Have you ever passed the Great Barrier? A few times. I was called there to catch some large monsters, and I was often called out during the large-scale floods. Every hero had visited the place at least once. Beyond the barrier lay a land with twisted laws of physics and a distorted terrain. It was a place the otherworld had invaded and that humanity had given up on. Nevertheless, most heroes occasionally visited, whether for their own stories or when they were called by the association to help out. I wondered why he was asking me about something so obvious. That's not really what I wanted to talk about. He continued to fiddle with his glass before taking a drink, as if it pained him to continue. A silence flowed between us. In that moment, it felt as if we were in our own world, separated from the rest of the bustling restaurant. The pork belly sizzled between our silence, a reminder that time itself hadn't frozen. I reached the tongs toward the pork belly and cut the meat into bite-sized pieces with my small hands, waiting for his next words. Just as the wrinkles on his face were about to turn red from the alcohol, he opened his mouth once more. Have you seen people living beyond the Great Barrier? I've heard about them, but I've never seen them. I'd been too busy crushing the enemies in front of me with my hammer whenever I was called out there. That's where I was, he said. For over 10 years? I asked. Yeah. Wasn't that a rather interesting story? Though everyone had some understanding of the situation beyond the barrier, information was restricted, so it was hard to get the full picture. I carefully used the tongs to place the slightly burnt meat onto the plates while intently listening to him speak. They all lived normal lives. They cried and laughed just like everyone else. Even though their bodies had changed due to the otherworld's laws, they considered themselves human. They lived their lives normally, often supporting one another. He took another shot of alcohol, suffering as he spoke. Wouldn't we have been able to save them if we tried a little harder? If we, or the UN, were a bit faster? He spoke faster, pouring his emotions into every word, which only made him more difficult to understand. Was it because he was beginning to feel the alcohol? His face grew redder as he gestured with his hands, as if trying to persuade me. He was no longer the proud hero who had stood on stage just moments prior. Instead, he seemed like a forgotten middle-aged man lost in the past. If that's what you saw and felt, I'm sure that you're right, I said. Then, he continued to share his opinions with me. I hadn't heard such a beautiful, justice-filled dream in a long while. It was as if his breath itself, infused with righteousness, was reigniting the embers within me that would guide me toward the right path. Dong-hoon, do you understand that the times have changed? Nowadays, heroes don't chase after justice. You might wonder, then, what heroes strove for instead. The answer is rather simple: to be recognized, to add a line to their resume, to have a number to pad their stats. You've been away from society for a long time. The world has changed so much. I couldn't bear to tell him the truth. I didn't want to ruin my friend's mood. I agreed with him, after all. I simply wanted to enjoy recalling a time when heroes truly pursued justice. In fact, I found myself a little envious of how he could speak so passionately about justice, even after getting drunk. It was impossible for my monstrous body to get drunk, so I simply poured the clear alcohol down my throat one more time. Need me to take you home? I asked. I might be retired, but I can still walk home alone fine, all right? Yeah, get some rest then. Let's see each other more often. I tried to support him in his drunken stumble, but he refused my help and looked at me with his flushed face. Haram. What now? Back then, were we heroes for justice? Wasn't that obvious? Don't ask such stupid questions. Have you forgotten already? We protected people and they thanked us. They were all sincere. Yeah, right? He slowly walked into the darkness. Since he at least waved at me before heading off, I felt there was no need to worry about him anymore. There was no stumble to his step and he was able to walk straight. I turned my back to him and headed home. It had been a long day. Not only did I appear on TV, but I also reunited with an old friend I had lost contact with. To avoid getting caught up in a monotonous routine, special incidents like those, whether positive or negative, were important. I walked through the night, past a flickering street lamp, and finally made it home. My small room, which was less than 300 square feet, was cheap due to its location in an area prone to incidents. Despite its size, it was also a significant decision for me. I opened the door and entered my room to hear the sound of the TV. I was fairly certain that the damned furball was watching it. I'm home, I called out as I entered the room. Still, the damned furball didn't greet me. I didn't mind much. After all, I didn't expect anything different. Well, I suppose I did mind a little. I took my boots off and fully walked in to witness the furball emerged in a bag of chips, munching away. Pissed off, I kicked the bag. Ah-ha-ha! It was a bit refreshing to hear the strange scream as the bag, including the furball, hit the wall, but I knew he wasn't hurt in the slightest. Still, seemingly shocked by being kicked, the white furball poked his head out of the bag of chips to look around. "Ah, you're back." Seeing his carefree response, I picked him up by his cheeks. "I thought I told you to stop eating snacks. Did you forget what I was going to do to you if you got any fatter?" Well, his pattern was as simple as it was easy to predict. Since he expected me to return late, he planned to eat the snacks and dispose of the evidence. Annoyed by his stammering and attempts to come up with an excuse, I squeezed him harder. As I tightened my grip, his fat oozed between my fingers, deforming his face from a circle into an oval. "Stop! It hurts." "Garg." He refused to admit his mistakes, so I squeezed him even tighter. The squishy sounds turned to the creaking of bones, and he cried out once more. "I won't eat snacks. I'm sorry." Only then did the white furball admit his own mistakes, and only then did I let him go. Thud. The lump of fat bounced slightly on the floor before pawing his distorted face. "What are you going to do if I don't return to normal?" "What else? I'll beat you until you do." I squeezed my fists and gave him a look. Obviously, I hadn't planned to do that at all. Still, a small threat was necessary if I wanted to correct his behavior. "Poyuyu." Scared, the white furball cried out as he vanished somewhere on his own. He must have been truly scared for his habit of extending his poyo to return like that. Still, after all of the scolding I'd given him, he likely wouldn't be eating any snacks for at least a few weeks. It was impossible for that fat ferret to keep a promise any longer than that anyway. Looking around the living room Unho had left, I saw a complete mess and snack crumbs scattered everywhere. I swept the crumbs up with a broom, gathered them into a plastic bag, and tossed it all in the trash. As I continued to clean, I heard a familiar voice again. Of course, if I could become a hero again, I wouldn't hesitate to leap back into the fray. Donghoon's voice flowed out of the TV. He sounded proud and confident. His words and actions embodied exactly what one would expect from a proud hero with a heart full of justice. During the filming, it seemed exactly like him, but seeing it on TV later, I had a different perspective. Was he truly expressing his feelings, or was he embellishing them to hide the parts of his heart that were rotting away? As I was lost in thought, my phone rang. A wish that everyone has. I picked up the phone and answered. "Hello? Hello? Is this Haram Lee?" "Yes, what is it?" "Please come quickly to Seoul Superpower Central Hospital." Superpower Central Hospital? Why would I go there? Did something happen? Do you know Donghoon Kim, by any chance? An ominous feeling grew within me. Yes, he's my friend. He's currently in the emergency room. He isn't likely to die, but he is in a dangeroo. Thud. The smartphone fell to the floor. Though the voice continued to flow from the phone, I absent-mindedly stared at the TV. The heavy weight of humanity does not rest on your shoulders alone. I hope. "Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee? Can you hear me?" The voice called out to me from the phone on the ground while the man on the TV continued his energetic speech. Everything felt like a lie.